As you've already learned, checkmate with 2 rooks is pretty easy, and checkmating with just 1 queen is simple too, once you know how to do it. Another common checkmate comes from king plus rook versus king. In this position, you don't have the power of the queen, and instead have to use some patience to get the job done. Let's see how to do it. The first thing the rook needs to do is put the king into a box. After rook h4, notice the black king is within this box, and white's goal is to never allow the black king to escape from this box. Black's king gets closer to the rook, and white's rook, unlike the queen, will need help from the king to push the black king into the corner and deliver checkmate. The reason why is the rook cannot move diagonally, so the lone king can sneak up and attack the rook from a diagonal. This means white needs to bring the king closer to the rook and protect it, like this. After king g5, black threatens to win white's rook, and white's king arrives just in time to protect the rook. White begins the slow but effective plan of pushing black's king back into a corner in order to deliver checkmate. After every move, the side with the rook has to ask, can my rook safely shrink the box? If the answer is yes, then move the rook. If the answer is no, then move the king closer to the opponent's king. In this position, can white's rook safely shrink the box? Yes, it can, with rook g4. How about now? Can white shrink the box again? If you said rook f4, you're correct. White shrinks the box once again. After king d5, can white shrink the box? Well, not safely, because after rook e4, the king would just take the rook. Also notice if the rook moves to f5, the king is able to run outside of the box. So remember, when you can't shrink the box, move your king closer to the opponent's king, like this. After king e5, can white shrink the box now? Notice if rook e4 check, the black king is able to move outside of the box. Remember, in a rook and king versus king position, only check the king with the rook when it is checkmate. Otherwise, bring your king closer to the opponent's king. White brings the king closer to the other king, and after king d5, can white shrink the box? You bet. Rook e4. So slowly but surely, white is making progress. After king d6, white cannot shrink the box safely, so white brings the king closer to the opponent's king. After king c6, can white shrink the box? Absolutely. Rook e5. After king d6, black decides to give white some trouble. In this position, I can't shrink the box as white, because if we play rook to d5 check, the king escapes. But also, how do I move the king closer to the opponent's king? I can't. So what do we do here? In this position, we just need to move our king somewhere to protect our rook. And in fact, there's only one square to do it. King e4. After king c6, can white shrink the box now? Absolutely. Rook to d5. And notice, white's making some real progress now. After king c7, white brings the king closer to the opponent's king. And after king c6, white continues to bring the king closer. After king c7, can white shrink the box now? Absolutely. Rook to d6. And after king to b7, white plays king to d7, getting closer to the opponent's king. After king b8, can white shrink the box? Yes, after rook c6. White's getting really close to pushing that king into the corner. After king b7, here we are again. White cannot shrink the box, but we also can't move the king closer to the opponent's king. What to do? When this happens, it's simple. Just protect your rook and make black move. Black moves to b8, and can you shrink the box now with the rook? Absolutely. Rook to c7. And after king to a8, white brings the king closer to the opponent's king. King b8. White moves the king closer again. And now, after king a8, the king is finally in the corner, and white is ready to deliver a checkmate. Can you see which rook move will deliver checkmate? If you found rook to c8, checkmate. Great job. White delivers a checkmate. After learning how to checkmate with the queen and king, and now the rook and king versus king, you may expect the next videos to include checkmate with a king and one other piece. It turns out only the queen and rook can partner with the king by themselves to checkmate a lone king. All other pieces need more support to deliver a checkmate. Now that you've learned how to checkmate a king with a rook and king, it's your turn to practice the king and rook checkmate.